Hi, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to give it another few minutes before we go ahead and get started. Great. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I'm Dave Wallach, Executive Director of Americans for Responsible Growth, a national advocacy group that's working with state and local financial leaders, state treasurers, comptrollers, and auditors who see firsthand how federal policies impact their constituents, businesses, and communities. Today, we're here to push back against the Trump administration's reckless tariffs and trade wars with Canada and Mexico, policies that would raise costs for families and workers around the country. We're joined by a distinguished panel of financial leaders: Illinois State Treasurer Mike Frerichs, Nevada State Treasurer Zach Conine, Colorado State Treasurer Dave Young, Oregon State Treasurer Elizabeth Steiner, and Minnesota State Auditor Julie Blaha. This call is being recorded, and we're going to share it afterwards, and we'll also have time for questions and answers at the end. So with that, let me turn it over to Treasurer Frerichs.
Great. Let me say the calling card for this administration has been sowing fear and chaos, causing instability for so many Americans. And today we see it yet again. Tariffs likely delayed for another month. This is not a way to run a business, and it's certainly not a way to run a country. Constantly moving the goalposts on tariffs creates uncertainty and instability. Businesses can't plan. Folks worry about Trump lowering the boom in a month with his tariff tax and then pull back on spending. President Trump is playing the role of Lucy, yanking away the football and leaving Charlie Brown on his back. That puts American consumers and small business owners in the role of Charlie Brown. This is bad policy, it's bad for our economy, and it's terrible planning. As state treasurers, we have a duty to push back amidst Trump's lies and false promises. Now, I'm a big believer in focusing on pragmatic kitchen table issues, no matter who is president. And tariffs are a kitchen table issue. What it really is a Trump tax. We all know who's going to pay the price for the Trump tax. It's American families from their pocketbooks and American workers losing their jobs. We're going to see higher prices on a wide range of products: vegetables, meat, cell phones, cars, those for starters, gasoline as well. All of it is a Trump tax on American workers. If you're already struggling, this will add to your financial burden. The early signs are not promising on the Trump tax. Consumer confidence nosedived last month. Business expansion is slowing due to all the uncertainty, and the stock market has been tanking. What does Trump say to the American people about all this? He says to buckle up because it'll cause a disturbance, which sounds something like Emperor Palpatine might say in the Star Wars movies while having an evil cackle. As a kid growing up in Central Illinois, I worked in fields. I worked overnight as a grain elevator. My state exports billions of dollars in soybeans, corn, pork, and specialty crops. Trump is sparking an unnecessary trade war, and farmers are going to be among the first victims. For us in Illinois, the Trump tax will mean lower prices for farmers. ADM, based in Illinois, already announced layoffs amid regulatory policy uncertainty and global market challenges. We know what they're talking about. Nearly 1 in 10 non-farm jobs in Illinois is in manufacturing, and the Canadian market accounts for almost a third of manufacturing exports from Illinois. The Trump tax will push Canadian buyers to our competitors, like China. We've got a Ford assembly plant in Chicago, and the Trump tax could mean layoffs. Ford's CEO has warned the Trump tariffs will blow a hole in the U.S. industry that we have never seen before. It gives free rein to South Korean and Japanese and European companies. Illinois refines a lot of Canadian crude oil. Chanting "drill, baby, drill" will not protect the workers of those refineries from the Trump tax. And Illinois families will pay the Trump tax every time they fill up a tank of gas. Trump campaigned on lowering inflation, including the price of food. The Trump tax on Mexico will hurt our families at the kitchen table, increasing the price of things like chocolate, avocados, tomatoes, and many other foods. Now, we should acknowledge where we can that targeted tariffs are sometimes needed to fight back when countries like China don't play by the rules. Presidents of both parties have used them. But steep across-the-board tariffs on our allies is not a trade policy, it's a Trump tax. Even the head of the Illinois Manufacturers Association, which is not a progressive group, I assure you, said tariffs should be used as a scalpel, not as a sledgehammer. And that's how Trump is using them. Also looming is Trump's reciprocal tariff tax plan that could spark a broader trade war and increase prices for our families even more. This will add to the Trump tax burden. And what I say and what more Americans are saying is we've had enough. With that, I'll turn it back to Dave.
Thank you, Treasurer Frerichs. Now we're going to move on to Nevada State Treasurer Zach Conine. Treasurer Conine.
Thanks, Dave. And thanks to everybody for being here today. I come to you from Nevada, a state that is basically dependent on people having money in their pockets to be able to come here and enjoy our fantastic offerings. But unfortunately, in the last few weeks, we have seen just massive disruption in the plans of individuals thinking about coming to Nevada from Canada, from Mexico, two of our largest sources of international tourism. And as Treasurer Frerichs said, one of the biggest pieces here, one of the biggest dangers is the uncertainty caused by just not knowing what's going to happen next, right? I mean, the different number of policies that have come out on tariffs in the last 24 hours is almost as many different ways as Dave Wallach has found to pronounce the great state of Nevada's name. It is just coming at us from all sides. And when people are trying to make plans, whether it's individuals, it's tourists, it's conventions thinking about whether or not they should come to Nevada in a big way or a small way, uncertainty matters here. You know, Trump has been said to really enjoy the McKinley model, right? That, you know, you're going to throw a lot of high tariffs, and that obviously went super well, leading the country into a depression and an 18% unemployment rate in the 1890s. You would think, being a student of history, would tell us something, but it seems that Mr. Trump, President Trump, and co-president Musk are really just more interested in throwing a bunch of shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. Unfortunately, between the people throwing it and the wall are the American citizens who are going to have to pay for all of this chaos. Entropy is not a great thing when it comes to government. Governments are big. They should move slowly and intentionally, because when we get something wrong, we get it wrong at scale. And there's nothing quite as disruptive as saying we're going to have a tariff against Mexico. Just kidding, we're not. We're going to have a tariff on cars. Just kidding, we're not, right? This administration is gaslighting the American people and trying to distract them from the fact that eggs are more expensive than ever, that it's getting harder and harder to find a job, and that when we look at some of the big challenges that we need to solve as a country, things like affordable housing, tariffs are just going to make each component of that fix more expensive. So don't get distracted by, you know, we're in a fight over here, or we're in a fight over there, we're going to be a tough guy. Let's look for a government that can be intentional. Let's look for a government that makes a plan that is a little bit more than the last person that talked to the president. And until we can see that, you're going to see state treasurers, just like all of us and our compatriots around the country, doing everything we can to protect the very, very important livelihoods and businesses within our states with every tool that we've got. Because if we don't solve this thing on a financial level, we're just not going to solve it at all. I could talk more about the great state of Nevada and how you should all visit Nevada, how it would be wonderful for you to all plan a trip, maybe right now, but you should listen to Treasurer Young and then plan a trip after the call. All right, Dave?
Thank you very much. With that, Colorado State Treasurer Dave Young.
Thank you, Dave, and good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. I am Dave Young, the Colorado State Treasurer, and today I'm proud to speak out against President Trump's reckless economic agenda alongside these great colleagues of mine. And while I'm glad to see that President Trump may be reconsidering his policies here with this announcement of a temporary pause, we know this will continue to cause chaos. The right thing to do is to end this game of chicken today. So as you've heard the other treasurers, and it's the same with me, I'm responsible for keeping our tax dollars safe and securing Colorado's financial future. We manage a delicate cash flow and thoughtfully invest state funds, powering essential services across our state for the benefit of all Coloradans. And we do that while reducing the burden on taxpayers. President Trump's actions have caused chaos and confusion, making this mission much more difficult. Left unchecked, his policies will have damaging consequences for Coloradans and the rest of the nation. With almost $10 billion in activity, Canada and Mexico are two of Colorado's top trading partners. Last year, we imported $6.5 billion in goods annually from these countries. And this includes machinery, computer and electronic equipment, household appliances, and other essential items that all of us use every day. Coloradans are particularly vulnerable. Our state's only refinery, Suncor, is based in Canada and accounts for 40% of our petroleum market. In fact, oil and gas make up 62% of our Canadian imports. If tariffs go into effect, Coloradans can expect higher prices for gas, diesel, and other fuel products that keep our economy humming. This policy will also crush Colorado businesses. Last year, we paid just $7.4 million in tariffs on $6.5 billion of imports from Canada and Mexico. That's an effective tax rate of about 0.12%. Taken together, these tariffs that are set to go into effect or are in effect will actually cost us $1.4 billion annually. And this is that Trump tax that Treasurer Frerichs was talking about. It's a needless expense the companies cannot afford, and they'll pass on most likely with higher prices. Colorado has much to lose on exports like beef, aerospace parts, and power transmission equipment. Our exports to Mexico alone have grown by 80% over the past decade, surpassing Canada last year. A tariff standoff will directly harm Colorado's cornerstone industries, agriculture, aerospace, and advanced manufacturing. Without markets to sell to, we can expect companies to shutter. Absolutely don't want to see that happen. This chaos could not come at a worse time for Coloradans who are already struggling to make ends meet. Over 115,000 jobs in Colorado are linked to trade with Canada and Mexico, putting families at risk. Increased tariffs will also reduce Colorado's spending power, shrinking our state's budget that is already projecting a $1.2 billion shortfall. Less state revenue will require deep cuts to behavioral health, public schools, and other essential services that Coloradans depend on. I know this firsthand. My sister, who is developmentally disabled, relies on Medicaid for life-sustaining care. Tariffs will have wide-ranging consequences. A trade war will result in punishing prices, brutal layoffs, and decreased activity, undermining Colorado's vibrant economy. I urge my fellow state treasurers and members of Congress to stand up for the American people. Together, we can stop Trump's reckless economic agenda before it causes real harm. Thank you. And Dave, I'll pass this back to you.
Great. Thank you, Treasurer Young. Next, we're going to go to Oregon State Treasurer Elizabeth Steiner. Treasurer Steiner.
Thank you so much, Dave. As the Oregon State Treasurer, I'm really glad to have this opportunity to address the impact that full-blown tariffs pose for the people of Oregon and the nation, along with the other economically destabilizing steps the administration is taking. The administration's broad-based tariff price hikes will be unaffordable for most Oregonians. Compounding the financial stress these tariffs impose on households and businesses is the confusion and uncertainty the administration's on-again, off-again announcements have created, as several of my colleagues have already said. Government is supposed to be predictable and steady. Businesses and individuals depend on government to act rationally and reasonably. This administration is doing the opposite. Economists have projected that these full-blown tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China are likely to cost each American household $1,200 a year. I'm a family physician, and I know that financial security is the key to good health. Yet for too many Oregonians, as we say, there is too much month left at the end of the money. A $1,200 expense that no one in Oregon asked for is a cost that most Oregonians cannot absorb, and it will harm their physical and mental health. In Oregon, we published last month the results of a financial wellness survey of Oregonians conducted by Oregon State University. According to this survey, nearly 1 in 2 Oregonians reported that they cannot afford an emergency expense of more than $500. How then can they afford an additional $1,200 a month on top of their expenses due to these reckless tariffs? Middle and lower income families reported their particular challenge is saving for emergencies, their children's education, and retirement. Requiring them to spend an additional $1,200 a month makes this even harder. Many of the families that I represent in Oregon will be hurt by these tariff increases, especially when you look at the sectors of our state's economy that are likely to see these price shocks due to the proposed tariffs. As others have said, Canada, Mexico, and China are 3 of Oregon's top 4 trading partners, accounting for more than $15 billion a year each in exports from our state. Tariff price hikes are likely to increase the cost of items that consumers and businesses depend on, such as electronics, clothing, appliances, and other products we all use every day. And in Oregon, these new proposed tariffs are particularly worrisome because they threaten to further raise the cost of housing construction, making our housing shortage worse, threatening jobs in the construction industry, and making it harder for most families to afford housing, an issue that I know is true for almost every state in the union. And in turn, tariff price hikes are likely to make it harder for Oregon businesses to sell products that are integral to our state economy, such as computer chips and other electronics, agricultural products, machinery, and other equipment. The administration, through its newly imposed tariffs, is injecting uncertainty and volatility into global, national, and state economies, which have already created serious unnecessary risks for businesses in Oregon and for state and local governments. We've seen this over the past several days with the fact that the stock market has been reeling, losing hundreds of points, and the major indices have lost approximately 3% of their value. How are families and businesses supposed to plan if draconian tariffs keep getting announced, then delayed, then reimposed, then delayed, and maybe they're on some things and maybe not on others? This kind of predictability is not what government is supposed to do, or lack of predictability, to be more precise. As Oregon State Treasurer, I am deeply concerned that the administration's actions will spur increased inflation, leading to cascading job cuts throughout the economy and creating a long-term drag on our economy. The president has not articulated an economic reason for these tariffs, which essentially amount to a self-inflicted wound to our economy and the financial well-being, the emotional and physical well-being of Americans and Oregonians. I urge the administration to take these tariffs off the table for good. We cannot afford these economically reckless actions. Instead, I encourage the administration to work with states like Oregon to lower prices, protect jobs, and restore confidence in our economy. Thank you, and I'll turn it back to Dave.
Thank you, Treasurer Steiner. We have one more speaker, Minnesota State Auditor Julie Blaha. And after that, we're going to take questions. So please, if you have questions, load them into the Zoom platform. With that, Auditor Blaha.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you all for coming out to hear about this really important issue and how it affects those of us who are really connected to people who are feeling it firsthand. In Minnesota, the state auditor oversees about $60 billion in government activity. And in my case, it's mostly at the local level. So I get to see how this hits Main Street. And really, this uncertainty is my biggest concern. Uncertainty just kills opportunity. And honestly, the Trump trade wars, to add my own metaphor to all the other wonderful metaphors I've heard today, the Trump trade wars are like a kid who stole a pickup and is doing donuts on your lawn. You know, even if he eventually gets that thing turned in the right direction, he still has wrecked your yard by the time he gets out. And that's what's happening here. Trump is spinning chaos all over the economy, and there will be long-term damage no matter where these tariffs end up. You know, talk about uncertainty, killing opportunity. When things are uncertain, you delay decisions. So you have people delaying equipment purchases. You have them delaying hiring. So not only are they going to miss out on some good deals potentially, but they're also going to have a paralysis effect that can drag down the whole wider economy. And in Minnesota, that will affect us significantly. We have about $20 billion in foreign trade in Minnesota, about $7.1 billion to Canada, $3.3 billion to Mexico. We import, it's our biggest importer for crude oil, potash, which if you're a gardener or a farmer, you know is incredibly important to getting your crops to grow well, and power. About 1.5 million homes are powered by Canadian power in between Minnesota, New York, and Michigan. And this is going to have more than just a one-hit kind of an effect. For instance, General Mills. They buy oats from Canada, they process them in Minnesota, then they sell them back to Canada as Cheerios. So that every time that crosses the border, there's another tariff. Clearfield, and a local company that makes broadband equipment, their items cross the borders multiple times. Every time another tariff would be added. The Polaris CEO, Polaris is a big Minnesota company, says they're still dealing with the fallout from his first term tariffs. And Best Buy stocks have dropped 13% on that tariff announcement, and just with the tariffs on China, they anticipate their sales will drop 1%. Well, if they didn't have that, their sales would either be flat or go up 2%. So these are having direct effects on Minnesota companies, Minnesota agriculture. Minnesotans want to turn the light on and see and be able to see what's going on in their house. This is a huge effect, and one thing I've learned from local government is that their biggest goal is to keep things calm. They want it calm, they want it predictable, they want people to just be able to live their lives and not think about whether the water will come out when they turn the tap on, or the lights will turn on when they turn on the switch. And I would like to see, I'd urge Trump to be a lot more like a small town mayor and a less like a kid on a joyride. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're going to move to the questions. First question we have is, Donald Trump just announced a months-long pause on products from Mexico. Can you talk about why the back and forth with our closest trade partners is hurting our economy and impacting consumers, even if tariffs are yet to be implemented? Treasurer Conine, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, let's just talk about the convention and travel business here in Nevada. Most folks aren't making the decision to attend or to start a conference in Nevada the day before the conference. These things are planned 18 months out. They require some level of predictability. I think what we're really seeing is that the Trump administration has absolutely no idea how to run a business, which makes sense having bankrupted a casino. I think we've had a little bit of warning there that might be the case. It's saying that automakers, if they had 30 more days, could move all their production domestically, showcases just a massive misunderstanding with how the world works. And so what we see is when there is a potential of uncertainty in the future, people keep their money in their pockets. And, given the cost of everything at the grocery store these days, it probably isn't the worst decision for them in some ways. So when there is a threat of a tariff, in the same way that that threat of a tariff is intended to make the country on the other side of it make different choices, it also makes the American consumer make different choices.
Would anybody else like to answer that question, or should we move on to the next one?
I'd like to throw something in there too. Again, Julie Blaha, Minnesota State Auditor. We're talking about this from our positions. You might be thinking we're thinking about taxes, but we're thinking about other things that are affecting our local economies and the work that we have to do. For instance, I am on the board of our State Board of Investment. We invest about $150 billion that primarily supports public employee pensions in Minnesota. This uncertainty is not helping us keep those investments safe so that we can continue to have dignity in retirement. So these things are going to come in a lot of different ways, not merely direct income of our residents, but also how we handle other areas of government. I'm also on our board, our Minnesota Housing Authority. With the jumps in housing prices and construction prices, just over the last couple of years have already really hurt us in the ability to provide more affordable housing. And if these tariffs will only make that harder. In a time when we already have stress, we already have shortages, we already have had effects of inflation, we do not need this at all.
Great, thank you. So we'll move on to a question from Peter Hancock to Treasurer Frerichs. How do the tariffs and potentially retaliatory tariffs affect the state treasurer's office? Is there an impact on the state's cash flow or interest rates earned on idle funds? How does it affect your job as treasurer?
You're muted, Treasurer Frerichs.
There has definitely been an impact on cash flow, and that comes from the Trump administration withholding funds for states out there. That makes long-term planning for the state difficult. It means we can't invest as long-term. The longer we are investing, generally the higher interest rate we earn, we bring in less money. That's the same for business. In the Treasurer's office, we're about building an economy that works for the long haul. We're not interested in scoring cheap political points on one day. These tariffs make it harder for businesses to plan, for farmers to expand, and for workers to find stable, well-paying jobs. And that's why we're opposing them, because our focus is on long-term economic security, not short-term headlines and scoring political points. Now, the farmers and the manufacturers in Illinois, they want fair trade, but they also need stability. When they can't predict what the next 6 months, let alone next month, will look like, they hold off on expanding their operations. That hurts our states. We want to level the playing field. We need policies to give workers and businesses confidence to invest in the future, not tariffs that keep them guessing whether their costs will spike overnight. And the same thing, since it affects our inflow here, and we don't know when money will be coming in, we invest shorter, and it becomes a vicious cycle. We bring in less money, and that causes problems for all of us.
Great. Treasurer Steiner, you want to take that as well?
Thanks. I just want to add a couple of points, and several of my colleagues have alluded to this, but one of the things that people aren't talking about enough is the cascading impact of tariffs and costs, which is to say this. If, for example, as Treasurer Conine said, people choose not to spend money because prices are too high, because they can't afford to buy their kid a new outfit for school or something like that, that results in layoffs in our retail stores. When those layoffs happen, those people aren't spending money, and there are more layoffs. And furthermore, if they're not earning money, then tax revenues aren't flowing into our states that pay for critical services like public education, healthcare, public safety, and so much more. And that means that the citizens of our states are underserved in areas that they depend on. And so we see these cascading impacts of cuts in services, cuts in jobs, cuts everywhere, and it becomes a vicious cycle that self-perpetuates. When prices are unpredictable, when prices go up and down like yo-yos, nobody feels safe to spend their money on things, sometimes not even discretionary, but sometimes things that are true necessities. And they have to make a choice between housing and prescription medication, between housing and food, between housing and reliable transportation. None of those things are good for our economy. They're not good for our children in our states, because that kind of family stress leads to poor school performance, which ultimately leads to a less well-prepared workforce. So the cascading impacts of this kind of uncertainty and these kinds of unnecessary price hikes will last for, as several others have said, years, if not decades, if not generations. And that's why they're so ill-advised.
Thank you, Treasurer Steiner. Would anybody else like to jump in on this before we move to the next question?
Dave Young, State Treasurer, and I just want to remind those that were on the call when I made my remarks. I said the state is already facing a $1.2 billion shortfall. And this is uncertainty that actually adds to the crisis that we have in the budget right now. And, you know, this Trump tax is going to increase prices, which is inflation. It's going to create uncertainty for businesses as to whether or not they want to even invest in our economies. They don't turn on a dime like President Trump's mind does every morning when he wakes up. They actually have to plan for the future. They have to make smart investments if they're going to expand their business. And this chaos doesn't lead to effective planning and successful operation of businesses.
Thank you, Treasurer Young. Now we're going to move on to the next question from Megan Arias. President Trump argues that these tariffs will boost domestic industry and prompt companies to manufacture goods here. Is that wrong, and why? And we'll start out with Treasurer Conine.
So conceptually, from an economic perspective, if you applied tariffs in a relatively focused and intentional manner, right, you could increase domestic supply of whatever that item was that you were imposing the tariff on. That's true. Intentional manner. What business is going to say, oh, there's a tariff this week, this hour, let's move all of our production back into the United States? And I think, functionally what we're doing is we're using a tool that somebody mentioned earlier, right? A scalpel as opposed to a chainsaw. And we're using it in a chainsaw manner. And that won't lead businesses to make new decisions. That will lead businesses to make no decisions, right? They're not going to bring things onshore if there's absolutely no understanding that that's going to be there in the future. I mean, look at right now, it's not a tariff issue, but look at the president's desire to unilaterally break contracts that the country has made and to not pay vendors for work that's already been done, right? If you're a business, why in the world would you put yourself in a place where you need to trust that the president is going to do the things he said he was going to do? The only thing the president has been consistent on historically is breaking his word.
Great. So if anybody, thank you, Treasurer. If anybody else has another question, we'll take another question, maybe two. So please put them into the chat.
Add one thing. If you think that this is going to bring industry back to America, one just needs to look at his last tariffs from his first administration.
Mm-hmm.
He imposed a lot of tariffs on China. It didn't bring a lot of jobs back to America. It brought a lot of jobs to Vietnam. What his tariffs did was to make Vietnam great again. But that didn't really help Illinois or U.S. consumers going forward. They were still looking for low labor markets out there. Companies moved them to another country, many of them not to America.
Thank you. Auditor Blaha, you wanted to add something?
Thank you. Yes. In Minnesota, our Iron Range is one of the most important economic drivers of our state. We produce a lot of taconite that's made into steel eventually. And so we've had a chance to see when really focused tariffs have been effective. Back in 2018, those to stop steel dumping, which it can be a real problem. Tariffs can be helpful when you're seeing a really unfair trade practice like dumping. But even then, you don't do it instantly. You have to think it through, make sure it's actually hitting the actor you're trying to really change. And that while that was helpful in our industry, it didn't mean we all of a sudden now have a whole bunch more steel mills. In fact, they're working on one steel mill up north, and it is going to take years to finish. If you were to add in supply chain disruption, I don't think that's going to slow down building any new manufacturing even more. Add to that, as we have all kinds of problems with immigration, draconian immigration rules, now you're not going to have a workforce to even staff the place. So you can't instantly onshore in the best of times. You really can't instantly onshore with the kind of chaos that Trump is building right now.
Great, thank you. And we'll give the final word to Treasurer Steiner. Treasurer.
Actually, Auditor Blaha said much of what I was going to say, which is anybody who thinks you can build a manufacturing plant in 30 days has never operated in the real world. I can't even build one out of Lego in 30 days. And do people want to bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States? Yes. We saw a lot of efficacy with that with the CHIPS Act, right? Of bringing manufacturing of high-end semiconductors back into the United States. In Oregon, the semiconductor industry is critical to us, and we see companies investing billions of dollars in building these plants. And I can tell you, having served in the legislature for 13 years and now as treasurer, those plants take a decade to build. We cannot onshore manufacturing in 30 days. So for them to say, we're going to put these things on pause for 30 days, and then we're going to put them all back in again. And by then, domestic auto manufacturers should have been able to figure out all their supply chain and bring it back from Mexico and Canada so that they're not impacted, is somewhat magical thinking.
Okay, and with that, we're going to close out. Thank you, Treasurers and Auditor Blaha, for your time, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. We'll be sharing the video out from this panel once we process the video. So thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.